Hej och välkomna till Udda Ting, en podcast om sällsamma historier, kreativitet och kreatörerna själva. Mitt namn är Henrik Möller, musiken är skapad av Testbild och loggan till podden är gjord av Malmökonstnären Nalle Chinsky. Så, nu när det börjar närma sig jul så ska vi ta ett lite extra julmysigt avsnitt om mord och ond bråd död. För det här avsnittet ska handla om New York-regissören William Lustig och i synnerhet hans två mest kända filmer, Maniac med Joe Spinell och Maniac med Bruce Campbell. Bill, han växte upp i New York som många som åker dit idag kanske tack och lov slipper uppleva. Det sunkiga, skitiga, förfallna New York som så misantropiskt presenteras i Taxi Driver.
It was, as you said, it's an entirely different New York City. It was gritty and grimy. Crime was pretty rampant, but accepted. You know, that's what we lived in. And, you know, it's an entirely different place. Now, New York City proper, you know, Manhattan is or even the boroughs now are really the land of the 1%, you know, you can't afford, to live there, you know, so gone are the artists, that, you know, we all revere because they can't afford to live there. It's just an entirely different environment.
Tell me of the grindhouse cinemas and midnight screenings that you used to visit in New York.
They didn't really have midnight screenings. They would play movies from 8:30 in the morning until probably 6 in the morning, giving time to clean the theater in between. And I have to say, you know, I used to go mostly in the morning and afternoons. I rarely went to the theaters because I lived in New Jersey at the time. So I had a commute to New Jersey, but I did occasionally go late, you know, in the early mornings, but that was when I lived in New York. Anyway, it was smelly. It had a horrible smell. It was a combination of this horrible body odor, rancid popcorn and hot dogs, combined with a disinfectant smell. It was just really bad smelling. Also, there were rats. In the theaters, they would have cats that would chase the rats. And often they would come down the aisle and you would hear the rats in the wrappers of the discarded candy and chips and things like that. You'd hear them crinkling around in it. And so you would do leg exercises so they wouldn't run into your feet. It was quite an experience, but and I didn't realize I was having an experience. To me, I took it for granted.
What kind of films did you like to watch when you went there?
Well, they played a big variety of movies. As an example, there was one cinema that played foreign art house movies. There was another cinema that played westerns, just nothing but double feature westerns. And then, of course, there were theaters that played, there was the big theaters that played horror and action movies. And then there were porno theaters, you know, adult cinema. So it was really a variety. I call 42nd Street kind of a smorgasbord of movies, of cinema. Because everybody has the impression it only played sex films and horror films, but it really had a big variety of movies that played there. I saw Fellini's Satyricon on 42nd Street. And, you know, you'd go there because it was cheap. But of course, you know, the projection stunk, the sound stunk, you know, the theater stunk. But you got to see it for 99 cents versus if you went, you know, to a proper theater in a better area of town, it would be at that time $5 to go see it. So it was a big savings.
Jag var ju tvungen att fråga Bill om legenden, att han är brorson till den kända boxaren Jake LaMotta som Martin Scorsese gjorde en film om, Raging Bull. baserat på hans egen självbiografi då. I've heard that you're the nephew of boxer Jake LaMotta. How well did you know your uncle? Were you close?
I was close with my uncle when I lived in New York, and he was alive. He just passed away a little more than a year ago. And but when I lived in New York, he was. I would meet him probably once a month for dinner. And when I was growing up, I used to frequently visit him when he was a bouncer at a strip club on Times Square. So, he was always in my life, and he was a big encouragement. I mean, I honestly credit him with me doing what I'm doing today, because, when you declare you want to become a director and you want to go into cinema, and I was probably about, mid-teens, it's not the profession your family wants you to go to. It's not stable. But yet he encouraged me and never stopped encouraging me.
I remember as a kid picking up that book Raging Bull and reading on the backside of it, Jake LaMotta, thief, rapist, killer. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, let me just tell you, that book is all bullshit. The book Raging Bull is total bullshit. Did he rob people or do shoplifting and steal stuff from push carts? And yeah, of course. But all the kids, he grew up in the Lower East Side of New York. He was poor, so they did do things like that. But as far as a rapist and a murderer and all that kind of stuff, that's just so over the top. The movie, on the other hand, with some minor things, is actually more accurate about his life than the book. The book is a work of fiction, total work of fiction.
Didn't he write it himself?
No, he didn't. He didn't write anything.
So what happened? Did they fuck him over?
Oh no, they didn't. It wasn't a fuck over. It was simply.
Well, the book painted him as this total monster.
Peter Savage, whose name is also on the book, is one of the writers, I believe. These guys. Pete was a mob guy who was very close to my uncle, who also was the one who helped me get into the film business. And what the thing is about these guys is they kind of look back at their lives like it's a Warner Brothers movie from the 30s and 40s. I don't know. They kind of do that. And it's not really, the book is just a total work of fiction. The funny part is, the one thing that struck me about Raging Bull is my uncle never cursed. And if you cursed in his presence, he would scold you for cursing. But he never cursed. So, yeah, he wasn't a saint, but at the same time, it really was, to a great extent, a fictitious book. And Scorsese and De Niro knew it. They liked the title. They liked, doing something with my uncle, but the movie is really accurate. That really, really smacks of authenticity. I was around, in the Bronx. I grew up in the Bronx, and I was born when my uncle retired, but I still knew a lot of the people that you kind of see in the movie.
Maniac wasn't your first film. I know that you made 2 films prior to Maniac and haven't seen them. Are they like short films or features?
No, they're feature-length adult movies. One of the things is when I did start to work in the film business, the hot genre at the time was adult movies, 35 millimeter, intended for theaters. It was very, very hot in the early 70s.
Okay. Were they softcore or hardcore pornos?
Well, hardcore. No, this was the birth of hardcore. It was right after Deep Throat, and everybody was trying to cash in on it. And I worked on my first one that Peter Savage produced and directed. I worked on it when I was 16. That was in 1971. And I worked on many others during that period, as well as, by the way, straight movies, movies that were, more mainstream. I worked as a production assistant. But I was just like trying to do everything to learn about movies and learn about all the aspects of making a movie.
Bill berättade i en gammal intervju om att hans farbror tog med honom hem till Martin Scorsese när han höll på att jobba med Raging Bull och presenterade honom som en filmregissör. Och Bill då skämdes och berättade för Martin Scorsese att han faktiskt bara hade gjort 2 porrfilmer än så länge. Men att Scorsese var väldigt, väldigt vänlig och uppmuntrande och sa att nej, skäms inte. Du är en filmregissör. Man gör vad man måste göra och snart så kommer du att regissera din första riktiga film. Och mycket riktigt, debuten låg bara runt hörnet. Det var skräcktrillern Maniac. So tell me, how did you make your first feature, Maniac?
I was 21 years old, and some people came to me. They had a little bit of money, and I suggested with that money, the most viable thing to do is to make an adult movie. I had a track record. I had worked on many of them, and so that was what we did. And then the second one I financed myself, and as a follow-up. But I really didn't want to do the second one. I did it, for economic reasons. But the first one was, it was financed by investors, and it did very well for everyone.
What were the struggles in making a low-budget film for like $300,000 in New York in 1979?
They're pretty obvious. You're limited in what you can do. But at the same time, I look back at having made, I worked on so much. I had a vast amount of experience when I started Maniac that I was able to operate, with cost efficiency. So I was able to get a lot on the screen for very little money. But yeah, it's all the obvious things. You're always operating like you're a burglar. You're always trying to, pull things over people, not to have to pay for stuff. And, and it becomes a constant game of survival when you're making a film for that kind of money. You're paying the crew, you're not paying them a lot of money. So, there's you have to deal with that. And it's just, it's a challenge. As an example, Joe is a prominent Screen Actors Guild member. And so he didn't want to get in trouble with the guild, but we could not afford to shoot Maniac under the guild's rules and regulations. So what we did is we looked at their contract, they call it. It's and what it showed is they would not endorse or sign a company doing an adult, or they actually called it X-rated. They didn't call it adult. They called it X-rated. And if you recall, around the time of Maniac, there were many movies that were getting slapped with X ratings for violence, including Dawn of the Dead. And there was Phantasm that got slapped, and all kinds of movies that, today wouldn't be, but back then were. Slap with X ratings, but what they would do is they'd give up the X rating and just release it unrated. They wouldn't use, because X still had the connotation of being adult. So what we did is we created a script to submit to Screen Actors Guild, telling them that this movie was intended to be X rated, and with that they declined to sign us. And that allowed us to be able to have Screen Actors Guild members in the movie.
I've heard that you paid your actors in pizza.
The actors didn't get paid up front. They got paid later. We actually paid everybody, including the crew, their proper wages, but we only paid a minimal amount up front and then paid the rest later when we started getting revenue in on the movie.
Joe Spinell är ju huvudrollen som mördaren i Maniac, och för dem som tror att de inte vet vem han är så kan jag berätta att han hade roller i både Gudfadern 1 och 2, Rocky 1 och 2, Taxi Driver, William Friedkin's Sorcerer och Cruising, John Milius Big Wednesday och många fler. Men jag tror att Maniac var hans första och enda huvudroll. Och det finns en otroligt bra dokumentär om hans liv och inspelningen av Maniac gjord av David Gregory från Severin Films. en minst sagt excentrisk och färgstark karaktär, Joe Spinell. But talking about the leading man, the star of Maniac, the late great Joe Spinell, how did you meet him and how did you get him to make that film with you?
I met Joe Spinell. I was working as a production assistant on a movie called The Seven Ups. That was Phil D'Antoni's follow-up to The French Connection. And Joe played like a thug in the movie. It might have had a different title overseas. It starred Roy Scheider and Tony LoBianco. It had a big car chase in New York. Anyway, I was a production assistant and Joe was a thug. And you know how it is when you meet somebody and you have a mutual love of horror movies. You immediately bond. Well, Joe and I bonded. And we began hanging out after the movie in New York.
So Joe Spinell was a horror film fan. I would never have guessed.
He wanted to be the new Vincent Price. He really did. He loved the idea of doing horror. No, he had a great career, you know, Godfather, Taxi Driver, all of that. But he really enjoyed horror films. In fact, he used to call me up. Oh, there's a movie playing 3 o'clock, 3 a.m. on 42nd Street, Hollywood Hillside Strangle. You want to go? And of course, he'd call me and I'd be in bed half asleep. And I'd wake up, get dressed and jump in a taxi and meet him on 42nd Street to go see Hollywood Hillside Strangler. I remember us seeing, things like, Tourist Trap with Chuck Connors and all these movies we would go see together.
Do you remember any film you saw together that impressed the both of you?
We went to see Halloween and that impressed the hell out of us. And, it was at that time, it was funny, before Halloween was released, the declaration in the industry was that horror, like Westerns, was dead. And then along comes Halloween, it becomes a huge hit.
Not long after came Maniac. I will not go off on a tangent here, but I just remembered and I had to ask. I'm a huge fan of Dario Argento's Inferno, and you worked on that film in New York. How did you get that gig?
I didn't really have a gig on Inferno. My producer partner, Andy Garoni, was the production manager on it. And what happened was one day he calls me up because, we're doing this movie, and it was only it was about a week shooting in New York. It wasn't more than that. And he calls me up because, we're doing this movie. And I said, oh, really? Who's the director? He said, Dario Argento. I said, Dario Argento? Are you kidding? And Andy didn't know who he was. His father didn't know, and nobody knew who he was, And so I came down to the set and hung out. And so I really, from a practical standpoint, I really didn't have I wasn't working on the movie. I was mostly hanging out on the movie.
Well, what did you do and what did you observe during your time there?
I was present in Central Park when they shot the scene where the guy who has the food truck goes to help the guy who is being attacked by the bag of rats, and he crosses over the water. And then he begins stabbing the guy. You remember that scene? I remember being there for hours while they did this one shot of the moon crossing between these skyscrapers with these matte plates and everything. And I was there for the exterior of. Now it was facing away from the building. It wasn't the building where the action took place, but you remember, like, for instance, she goes to mail something and she crosses the street. Do you remember that? Well, the shot of the mailbox was shot in New York. Her exiting the building was shot either in Rome or in Germany. I'm not really sure. But the exterior of the building was in Europe. And then when she comes past camera and there's a shot in reverse showing her put the mail in, that was shot in New York. The shot of the fire engines pulling up and the police cars pulling up was all shot in New York. And we had the smoke kind of billowing out, over the camera, indicating the house is on fire behind the camera. So it was those kinds of shots that were done. And I hung out with Dario.
You hung out with Dario Argento? Can you remember what you guys talked about?
Well, I'll tell you, it was funny. We again, horror fans bond. And he sat with me alone while they were doing setups on a bench in Central Park. And he was showing me, you see that he pointed to a window in a hotel. He said, I was staying in that hotel when I wrote this scene that we're shooting right now. Because the hotel overlooks Central Park. He said, that's where I wrote the scene. And he told me how much he loved shooting at night. And we just really bonded, him and Daria. And it was nice. We really, it was very nice. And he also was interested. I told him I want to make movies. And he kind of opened the door to that idea. And at one point, Dario was going to produce Maniac, and Goblin was going to do the score, and Dario Nicolodi was going to be in it. That was, but it all fell apart. So I think it was better I didn't have the shadow of Dario over my movie, because I was yet to be distinguished as a director, and if I had had Dario there, it would have been a Dario movie.
I made an Udda Ting episode of the Three Mothers trilogy. The story is that Inferno was a very troubled production, and that Dario was like on drugs, or at least very ill at the time, and he had to direct some scenes in a wheelchair or lying down.
I could tell you in New York, I didn't see any indication of that. I mean, the week that he was in New York, I didn't see any indication. So that's all. It was like 2 days in Central Park and 2 days on Riverside Drive. And when I say days, it was really nights. It was all night shooting. And, there might have been something else that I can't recall. I will tell you, though, that we did shoot that helicopter. There's helicopter footage that we shot for Inferno that was rejected by Dario because there was a shaking in the camera that we used in Maniac. So we repurposed footage that was intended for Inferno in Maniac, free of charge.
Det är intressant. Bill var ju faktiskt där på plats i New York. Så det alla andra säger i mitt avsnitt av Udda Ting då med Inferno-inspelningen är kanske intressant. But back to Maniac, how did you get brilliant special effects makeup artist Tom Savini to do the effects in your film? He was a big star then, right?
No, he wasn't. I had seen an early private screening of Dawn of the Dead, and I was blown away by the makeup effects in it. And so what happened is, when we got ready to do Maniac, I reached out to Dawn of the Dead producer Richard Rubenstein, who put us in touch with, gave us Tom Savini's information. Tom at the time was shooting Friday the 13th in New Jersey. So Joe, Andy, and myself got in the car. We made an appointment. We went out to visit him on the set of the original Friday the 13th, and told him about Maniac, and we're making this movie, and we want him to be a part of it, and all this and all. He really, at the end of the day, he was impressed by Joe because he recognized him from, the movies he had done. But the thing that he really needed and wanted was to, he didn't want to return to Pittsburgh because he had just broken up with a girl. And he said, can I come to New York and can you get me a place to stay? So I said, sure, we'll do that. So really, that's how we got Tom. But for the breakup, I don't know if he would have come to New York to do Maniac. I have to say the movie gods were kind to Maniac.
How much input did Joe Spinell bring to Maniac and that character he played?
Oh, enormous. Yeah, enormous. He was a true collaborator in the movie. He wasn't, he really took command of his character and his performance, and he was truly a collaborator.
So he didn't run you over and take over the show?
No, Joe was always a blue-collar actor. He was the guy who the Teamsters loved, and there was no pretense or anything. He was just a great, down-to-earth guy. I mean, he had his eccentricities, but he was really down to earth.
Jag försökte fiska fram anekdoter för den här podcasten, men Bill han pallade inte riktigt, och med all rätt så finns det ju faktiskt för många anekdoter kring Maniac, och sen så vill han ju någonstans att man ska köpa hans film och se extra materialet, audio commentary, så här svarade Bill helt enkelt.
There's lots. I mean, I really, there's so much. I just released a new Blu-ray of Maniac, and I mean, it's loaded with that kind of stuff in it. We have, you know, the outtake featurette, which I talk a lot about things that happened, and there's 2 commentaries. I mean, everything you ever want to know about Maniac is really on that Blu-ray. There's too much to kind of go over. I mean, there were anecdotes every day.
Men hur som helst så vill jag ändå bjuda på en guldanekdot, för den här är så bra så att alla som är intresserade av Maniac bara måste höra den. Scenen när Joe Spinell skjuter ihjäl det hånglande paret i bilen, där killen spelas av special effects-mannen Tom Savini själv. Bill och Joe ville ha en scen där någon får huvudet sprängt med ett hagelgevär, men de hade inte budgeten till det, och Tom berättade då att han hade en modell som han hade gjutit av sitt eget huvud. Den skulle kunna användas, men då fick ju Tom spela offret i den scenen. Det är typ fängelsestraff på att avlossa ett gevär i New York, så vad de gjorde var att de riggade bilen med 3 stycken kameror som filmade samtidigt. Tom klädde ut sig till Joe Spinell och hoppade upp på bilhuven och sköt med riktig ammo rakt genom bilrutan och sprängde huvudet på dockan av sig själv. Han berättade att rekylen fick honom att halka av bilhuven. Sen så var det ordnat så att Tom snabbt skulle kunna slänga in hagelgeväret genom fönstret på en annan bil som snabbt körde iväg från platsen. Resten av teamet fick ta ytterligare en bil, och jag tror att det var producenten som fick äran att köra den nedblodade bilen från brottsplatsen, som senare dumpades i kanalen. Så någonstans på kanalens botten i New York så ligger en bil med Tom Savinis, en replik av Tom Savinis söndersprängda huvud. Men som sagt, köp gärna DVD:n, Blu-rayn och lyssna på kommentarspåret. Det finns massor av underhållande anekdoter att avnjuta. Filmen blev extremt hatad när den släpptes, och som vanligt så verkar det som mest att det kom från folk som inte hade sett filmen utan bara hört rykten och sett den grova affischen. Alltså affischen är ju en grej i sig, och man måste nästan se den, men i kort så är det i alla fall en tecknad affisch på en man från midjan neråt som håller blodigt nyskalperat kvinnohår i ena handen, en kniv i den andra och en synlig erektion i byxorna. Folk flippar ju ut, minst sagt. After Maniac was released, there was this shitstorm of controversy.
It was controversy. It really was that Maniac became a lightning rod for the controversy that had been building up. With all the movies, the horror movies that were being released. Every week there was a new horror film that came out, you know, Don't Answer the Phone, this, that. And there was kind of a perception that these horror films were portraying women as victims. And so it became kind of a political as well as a social thing about, you know, women, you know, being portrayed as victims. Even though it wasn't entirely true, the posters, you know, in order to sex up the posters would always show a woman in danger, or, you know, her clothes ripped and, you know, being chased by a killer and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think a lot of it was the marketing, but some of it was the movies. And Maniac became this, with its provocative poster, it really became the lightning rod for the controversy. And as a result, I mean, I got a lot of angry letters, and there were a lot of news shows and stuff all about, you know, how horrible it was. Yeah, it was interesting.
There's this crazy story I've heard, and I can't remember the details, but there was this woman who defended the film, but later she was arrested for murdering someone herself.
Even more bizarre than that. There was a woman who stood in front of the theater, hadn't seen the movie, held up the ad for the movie, and held a press conference. She was the head of the National Organization for Women in Los Angeles. She held up the poster and said, you know, this shows you how women are stalked and killed every day, this kind of movie. And it was sometime after that, a year or two after that, I'm watching TV, and she was being arrested for being an accomplice to a murder that occurred years before she stood in front of that theater. It wasn't after it. It was before it. What it was is her boyfriend, she she would pretend to be a prostitute, or maybe she even was a prostitute. I don't really know. But it was one of these deals where, she'd lure men, someplace, and her boyfriend would rob them. There's a word for it. It's a scam, which has its own name for it. But, she'd be the bait, and her boyfriend, to lure them to a place where they'd be vulnerable, and her boyfriend would rob them. Well, and during one of those, one of the men was killed. And so she was arrested for being an accomplice.
So Maniac was a success then. A few years went by, and then you did Vigilante, quite a different film from Maniac.
I wanted to do something different than make another horror film. But I decided I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make an action film, and I wanted to make it in the style of the spaghetti westerns that I love. And I also... and so I wanted to shoot an urban action film. And it was an ambitious project. We didn't have very much money.
But by this time you had a couple of stars. I mean, Fred Williamson and Robert Forster.
I think both of them were in a valley as far as their careers were concerned. At the time I hired them. Fred, the black exploitation films had run their course. And so he wasn't working very much. And Bob Forster was also in a decline. He had done Alligator, which was a wonderful movie, but it wasn't really a big hit. So he was still, he was still kind of in a little bit of a funk. But I loved them both, and so I hired them because of them as actors. I didn't. The same with like Woody Strode.
This was a bigger budget film, right?
I mean, Maniac all in with all the deferments and everything was, just over $300,000 when it was all in, when we paid off all the crew and cast and vendors and everything. This movie was about a little more than 3 times the amount, about $1 million. All it was shot Screen Actors Guild. We had Teamsters. It was in many ways, it was still non-union crew, but everything else was union. And it was shot in New York City, and, took a long time to shoot because, we were doing these, car chases that you can't just shoot them on the fly. You have to prepare that stuff. And
these films were made so fast and so crazy. Do you often think back about things you want to change with them?
Of course. I mean, look. Every movie I've made, I look at as 90 minutes of mistakes. I mean, Maniac, I cringe when I watch Maniac. I see, I could have cut here, I could have done this, I should have done that. Same thing with Vigilante. I would say probably Maniac Cop was the first time I thought that I was a good craftsman on a film like Maniac Cop. It was efficiently made. I don't see as many mistakes starting with Maniac Cop. I mean, I see some, of course, that I would love to change, but, it started to lessen. Let me put it to you that way. It doesn't mean I'm a better director. It just means I'm a better craftsman. Having more confidence, knowing, how I was going to do things.
Okay, so how did you get Bruce Campbell for your next film, Maniac Cop?
Called Bruce up before we even had a script. I said, Bruce, I'm going to make a movie called Maniac Cop. I'd like you to star in it. I need you to fly to New York to shoot some footage. We don't have a script. Don't ask me what it's about, but we want to get some St. Patrick's Day footage into the movie, and we'll figure out where it goes later. And so he flew to New York. I told him to wear clothes we could duplicate. He did. And Sam was in town waiting for financing to come through for Darkman. And so Sam, Bruce, and myself and a couple of other people, we got in the van and went out and shot it. We shot all that footage of the parade.
But you didn't write that film. That film was written by Larry Cohen. How did that happen?
I was in New York, and Larry had just been fired from a movie, and calls me up and says, "Look, let's meet for lunch." And we did. And the topic came up, why haven't I done a follow-up to Maniac? And I said, I always thought of it as a singular movie. I never thought of it as a franchise movie. Of course, I never envisioned Elijah Wood would have done a remake. And he said, well, we were chatting back and forth. And at the time, you remember there was RoboCop, Beverly Hills Cop, a lot of these kind of movies with that title. So what about Maniac Cop? And I instantly said, that's a great idea. And as the lunch progressed, we came up with the copy line, you have the right to remain silent forever. So with those two things, that was in February. That's I started shooting the film in March, and Larry gave me a script. I think it was end of April. I had a script for the movie, and I got the financing from my friend Jim Glickenhaus, and went out, made the movie, started pre-production in July, and shot the movie in August.
So, Maniac Cop was your first properly budgeted film, and I heard that the production went smoothly.
Oh yeah, no, it was very efficiently made. I had a terrific crew, terrific line producer on it. It really went very smoothly. There was really no drama. Let me put it to you that way.
By this time, you were kind of this New York director, making genre film after genre film that takes place in New York. That's pretty cool.
No, it was. Yeah, I guess when I think about it, yeah, you're probably right. It is kind of unique. By the way, we only shot 4 days of Maniac Cop in New York.
Why?
New York is expensive.
But the film is supposed to take place in New York.
Well, it does take place in New York. It takes place, but we didn't shoot it. We just, cheated. After Vigilante, I was in a predicament where I really should have moved to Los Angeles sooner. I stayed in New York, wanting to remain in New York, and I wasn't able to really put together money to make movies there because all the companies were in Los Angeles. So I was kind of caught for years not being able to get traction to make another film. Funny enough, I moved to L.A. and then only for Maniac Cop to find the financing in New York from Jim Glickenhaus.
It's really interesting. Here I am, a fan of your film, and many years later, people have contacted you about this film, and I've heard that Nicholas Winding Refn, director of Drive and Pusher films, he contacted you because he was a fan of your film.
Well, I met him. I was doing some work in London and went to the St. Charles Theatre where I saw a British quad of the movie Pusher, where the skinhead has the two guns, kind of like John Woo style. I went to see the movie. I really liked it. The movie hadn't been released in the States, but I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, about a year or so later, I get a phone call out of the blue from a producer in Copenhagen requesting to license footage of Maniac for a movie he was producing. And I said, oh, really? And I asked him who the director was, and he said, Nicholas Winding Refn. I said, what has he done? He said, well, you wouldn't know because his movie hasn't been released in America. He's only done one other movie. I said, what movie? He said, Pusher. And I said, oh, I saw it in London and I loved it. And then within minutes of my hanging up with the producer, my phone rings and it's Nick. You saw my movie. I said, yeah, I loved it. Thought it was great. And that, kicked off a relationship. And it's a friendship that's remained to this day.
I've heard that the two of you have a project in the making as we speak.
Yeah, a Maniac Cop, a re-envision of Maniac Cop. We're looking to do it as a series for television. We have it planned for an 8-episode series, and to go on something like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, one of those streaming services.
So you're going to direct it?
And really, it's Nick, and he's got his people, and my producing credit is mostly honorary. I mean, I'll chime in with some ideas and but that's it.
Would you like to direct another film, or have you put that on the shelf?
I think about it, but the independent business now is really tough. It's much different. It's much different than when I was doing it. I mean, I don't know what you made your film for, but I mean, I just hear numbers that are pretty, they're making them for no money. They're making them for no money, and it's just become very, very challenging. We were making these movies. I was getting paid hefty salaries when I was making the films. Not when I made Maniac and Vigilante. I was, but when I started making like Maniac Cop and all that, it was, I was being paid.
I think you've met one of my heroes, Sergio Solima. Can you talk about that meeting?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I had dinner with him, and we shot interviews with him for Violent City, and I think it was Revolver. Yes, we shot an interview with him for Revolver. And, yeah, he was such a nice man. I'll never forget this. I had a very we shot both the interviews in the same day at his house, and then afterwards we went out for dinner, and he really loved it. He had all this attention with the crew and everybody, and we'd go out to dinner with him, and at the end of the dinner, when we were parting ways, there were tears in his eyes, and it really touched me. I'll never forget it. He had tears in his eyes.
You've done so many extras for your DVDs and Blu-rays. Do you have any favorite?
Well, I mean, my favorite extra, and I guess this is the one we did about David Gregory directed for Joe Spinell, the Joe Spinell story. I love that. I thought it was one of the best. I remember enjoying the Ricky Tugnazzi documentary we had for La Scorta. I like that one a lot. I'm involved with the extras, but once they're completed, I don't really go back and revisit them. The Joe Spinell story I have, but most of the time I don't.
So then you did Maniac Cop Part 2. Maniac Cop 2 was actually the first one I saw. It came out in 1990, and I was at the right age then. With the first one, I wasn't, I hadn't aged, and, you often grab what's new on the video store shelf.
We knew we were going to make a Maniac Cop 2 after we made Maniac Cop 1. And all I could say is Larry delivered a script that was far exceeded my expectations. And so it was easy to make Maniac Cop 2 in the sense that we had a very good blueprint, and then it just became enhancing it. Maniac Cop 3, on the other hand, was a troubled production, and it was troubled from pretty much the beginning.
There's this rumor that Bruce Campbell didn't like his part in Maniac Cop, that he thought that wasn't what his fans would like to see. He plays a rather dark character who is unfaithful to his wife, and that was apparently a big thing for him.
If he was, he never expressed it to me. Bruce was a professional when we made the film, and I've had many friendly conversations with him afterwards. In fact, he did the audio commentary for the movie, so how would he be disappointed if he did the audio commentary? I would say the evidence points that it's bullshit. It was a film noir, and that's what made Maniac Cop interesting. It was a combination film noir and horror film. That's what makes it an interesting character versus being something bland. But I don't recall, again, as I say, I don't recall him ever expressing any trepidation or anything else.
Okay, Bill, thanks a million for talking to me.
One day I hope to visit Sweden. I really do. It's the one country I've never been to. I've seen it from Copenhagen. I've looked out and saw Stockholm, I think it is, from Copenhagen.
No. From Copenhagen, that must be Malmö. That's my hometown, and yes, you should definitely come for a visit. Ja, det var allt för den här gången. Mitt namn är Henrik Möller. Musiken är skapad av Testbild. God jul!